Welcome to Community Conversations, where we bring you fascinating discussions with local leaders about topics that everyone is talking about. I'm Dr. Cynder Sinclair, and I will be your host today. Our special guest is Dr. Gayle Beebe, president of Westmont College. Welcome, Dr. Beebe.
Cinder, thanks for having me, and please feel free to call me Gayle.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Now, Gayle, you have been president of Westmont since 2007.
Yes.
So that means you're working on this is the beginning of year 18.
We're just wrapping up year 18. We
You're
have
wrapping it up.
commencements next Saturday.
Oh, golly.
Yeah.
So you're getting ready for 19.
Getting
Holy
ready to
cow.
start number 19. Yeah.
Over that time, I know you and your team have made many changes and additions to Westmont. Maybe you'd like to highlight a few that you're most proud of.
Well, I thank you for the question. We have been able to get a lot done. It's just been incredibly meaningful. The community has been incredibly supportive and also very generous. And so we've been able to build out the campus, 1,200 on the campus in Santa Barbara. We're only allowed to have 1,200 students. But we've also been able to expand downtown, and just a few blocks away from where we're located right now is our Westmont downtown campus, two buildings. Our Westmont Groton House nursing program is delivered there, and that's just been a wonderful partnership that's recently started. We're already producing nurses for Cottage Hospital and other healthcare providers in the community, and we're just grateful for the opportunity to do it, largely because of the generosity of the community.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, you've also raised quite a few funds for the college.
Well, and it's a great partnership. We have a wonderful team, and I love working with our advancement team. They're tireless in the pursuit of things that will actually help grow the college, and we exist for the public benefit. And so, as a nonprofit entity, everything that we do is meant to serve the educational purposes of the community, and nursing has become just one of those, but we've recently started an engineering program. We're now really in our 5th year with engineering. We went from 0 to 54 majors in 5 years, so we're really pleased with that. We've started a data analytics program that's a blend of math, computer science, and economics and business. That's been a huge success, and so we've moved into areas that include our traditional liberal arts foundation, but also our integrative majors that allow us to really kind of be on the cutting edge of new knowledge and new
Ah,
discovery.
yeah, it sounds like cutting edge is just the right word. And all of these donations are tax deductible, right?
Absolutely. Any gift to the college is, we're a 501(c)(3), and so they are tax deductible. And we're just grateful for, again, the provision. One of the things that you face in a community like Santa Barbara is you have a number of high net worth individuals and foundations, but you also have to have projects that they want done in the community.
Hmm.
And so the combination of wealth, the capacity, but also the willingness, has really allowed us to grow.
So a person can go on your website and make a
Absolutely.
donation, or
Yeah,
they could send a check from their IRA and mail it to you, snail
absolutely.
mail, or come to your office and
And the one of the favorite ways is literally to have their broker contact the advancement
okay,
office.
all
So
right, that's good.
there's all of those are if you just go to Westmont Giving, it'll take you right to the portal, and you can decide how you wanna do it. Thank you for letting me, even mention that.
That's
So
important.
it is, but, mostly we just love getting to be a part of the community and really being able to be
Mhm.
an active and contributing member of the community.
Well, and so we were talking about, ways that you have improved and grown Westmont. You've also navigated quite some challenges over the last several years, wildfires and mudslides and COVID pandemic. Gosh, it's almost like a storybook that nobody would believe. And I think I have heard you say that you have learned something from every one of those challenges. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Oh, that's absolutely true. We arrived in 2007, and we would do fire evacuation drills on campus as part of just the general training that students have to receive for emergency preparedness. I used to roll my eyes, kinda like, "Oh, I can't believe we're doing a fire
Oh,
drill."
golly.
And then we had the tea fire. It was the fall of my 2nd year. It literally, within moments or minutes of starting, came racing down the hillside, engulfed the campus, would end up burning a third of campus, destroy 15 faculty homes, 8 buildings on campus, 231 buildings or homes in the whole community. And those of us who were here then know that it was just devastating. Well,
Mhm.
we rode out the fire with the shelter in place program that had been imported in the early 2000s from Australia of creating a structure that's fireproof and you remove all the shrubs from it, which is our gym. Our gym is a concrete structure. There are no trees or bushes around it. And so we all kind of rode out the tea fire as it literally engulfed the campus. And that was our first experience of wildfires in California. The recovery was long and arduous, but again, you began to learn and you began to understand. And so when the Thomas Fire happened in 2017, that came to the edge of campus. We were prepared for it. The firefighters were just present. It moved much slower. It wasn't a surprise, or it had started. And by the time
Mhm.
it got to Santa Barbara, it wasn't a surprise. But just a few weeks later, we had the Montecito debris flow, which
Mhm.
happened just to the east of campus. It didn't touch campus, but it wiped out all the infrastructure. Of course, it destroyed 100 homes, damaged 400 others, killed 23 people. I
Mhm.
actually would attend 7 memorial services,
Sheesh.
of the 23, and so it was, it was just, disheartening. But you also, because of the earlier experiences, we knew we had the resilience to recover.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
knew how to actually put the campus back together. We had to go to portable dorms, portable bathrooms, portable showers. We had to enact just a variety of other emergency preparedness materials. We would end up having several forced evacuations because the sheriff's office didn't know who was actually still in harm's way. We were eventually able to hire a hydrologist that proved that we were actually in a watershed that hadn't collapsed, and so
Mhm.
the reason the water had not come onto campus was because we were in one watershed over, and so they let us repopulate that September, which was just crucial,
Yeah.
and it had been very disruptive, but the fall of '18, we got to return to normal. Again, we learned so much, and part of the way in which that prepared us for the very unpredictable pandemic
Mhm.
was, we knew how to do a lot of emergency
Mhm.
responses that in the fall of '20, when many of my colleagues in LA and San Diego County weren't allowed to
Mhm.
repopulate,
Mhm.
the county public health office allowed us to execute our plan. It was a 146-page plan of how we would comply with their regulations and also have the students back on campus. We were one of the few that were actually allowed to do that. So we set up, because it's a mild climate, we set up 14 outdoor learning centers
Mhm.
under tents with just the screens so that every faculty member could broadcast their lectures and do their PowerPoints. And so we literally went to class for fall of '20, spring of 2021 before the vaccination had arrived. And we were able to continue to meet on campus just in outdoor classroom settings because of the mild climate and because of our innovation. Now that is the spirit of Westmont, that
Mhm.
we every time we have a challenge, we learn something new, and then we take that learning and apply it to the next challenge. So, certainly been a lot of learning, things I, had no preference to ever have to learn, but,
Golly.
the learning was forced upon us, and we've made it through, and, like so many things in life, every challenge also has enormous opportunity, and
Mhm.
it's really up to you in terms of how you respond to challenge,
Mhm.
as to whether or not you'll conquer it.
Such creativity, such innovation. And so, no doubt the health department knew they could trust you.
Absolutely. That was actually inspiring because, again, this is just the beauty of our community. The people know one another and they trust one another. And
Mhm.
so the county public health knew the campus. In fact, one of the senior leadership members of the leadership team at the county lives near campus and even
Mhm.
exercises on campus. And so they knew we had a lot of land
Mhm.
per student. They knew that we would actually comply and that we're very willing. You tell us what the rules are and we'll live by them.
Mhm.
But thank you for letting us be open. And it honestly, it was just good for the students. It was good for the faculty. We all benefited from being together as we worked our way through it. But it was a very apprehensive time because people didn't know where the pandemic was going. Nobody wanted to get it because we just didn't have adequate understanding or treatment. And so it was, we had to be careful, but committing to be careful also allowed us to be open.
So did these any of these challenges teach you something new about God?
Absolutely. And as a person of faith, I think a lot of life teaches us more about
Mhm.
our life with God. So I ended up writing The Crucibles That Shape Us, and it was born out of I was speaking at our Lead Where You Stand leadership conference 4 years ago, and it's right as we were coming out of the pandemic. And a gentleman said, "You know, have you ever thought of writing about this? Because you've been through a lot of these challenges, and you know, it's instructive." I had made a presentation on some of the things I'd been learning, and so I took from that and actually wrote 3 of the chapters that are now in the book and submitted them to my publisher who's published earlier writings. And she was very, very positive about, the prospects and also found herself in the 3 chapters that I had written. And so
Interesting.
well, which I think is what captivated her with the idea of the book. And so I take 7 chapters to talk about what I have come to understand as 7 dominant challenges we often face in life,
Mhm.
and they have unique features to each one that impact you if you're in a leadership responsibility, and so I look at them through the lens of both a normal human being, but also a person who has responsibilities to lead an organization where you see these impacts on yourself, but you also see the impacts on members of your
Yeah.
organization.
And so, I mean, I have to say that Crucibles That Shape Us, I read that multiple times already.
Thank you, Cinder.
I have highlights everywhere and little stars and things. And so I think I remember that chapter 6 is, about human suffering, and
Very
you
much.
and particularly like that. Maybe you wanna just highlight
Well,
that a little bit.
the of the books I've written, this one has the most of me in it, if I can say it that way, in that it is very biographical, if not autobiographical. Chapter 6 is really all of us experience suffering and really view suffering in many ways as frustrating human desires and often devastating to us emotionally and
Mhm.
intellectually. And so I actually tell the story of my own journey with the problem of evil and suffering, and it starts with favorite pastor of mine that died when he was 32. It was a tragic accident on Mount Hood. If you grew up in Oregon, as I did, even though I grew up in the city, you work in the woods. I worked for International Paper Mill one summer to put my way through college and worked in the cabinet shop other summers. But a widowmaker is a tree that's standing but has actually died, and it breaks apart and comes down and crushes people, and these kinds of accidents happen periodically when people are hiking or in the woods, and his favorite pastor was up at a ranger station on the slope of Mount Hood. It was a popular place to get firewood. Got into a widowmaker, it killed him, leaving a wife and 4 small children.
Oh my
I
gosh.
was in my first year of seminary,
Mhm.
preparing, and when this happened, and I had gone to Princeton Seminary because my pastor had gone to Princeton Seminary, and I just had been so impacted by him. Well, it was really interesting because that experience of just kind of crisis, trauma, and suffering led me to meet Diogenes Allen, Stewart Professor of Philosophy at Princeton at the time, and he began helping me work through the problem of evil and suffering and how you could make sense of a loving God having created the world while experiencing such wrenching emotions and experiences. Well, I found it incredibly helpful.
Mm.
And he taught me so much about the nature of faith, the right use of reason, that there's a reasonableness to Christian belief that differs from being able to prove the existence of
Mhm,
God.
mhm.
And he started me on a path that continues to this day of really trying to sort through how you make sense of life and your relationship to God in the midst of life. And so I found that just really helpful.
Mhm.
Well, 7 years later, and quite quite sadly, my dad, who I just adored,
Mhm.
he died quite suddenly of a heart attack.
Mm.
And I realized as I worked my way through it that I was not devastated intellectually or spiritually. I definitely was devastated emotionally, but I
Mhm.
was available to immediate family members in a way that if Don hadn't have died 7 years earlier,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have been prepared for. And so I found myself really helping my mother especially, and also my sister, think through, their own understanding of the problem of evil and suffering and coming to terms with the death of my mother's husband and our father. And I just that was part of my growth of
Mhm.
recognizing that if you can learn how to make sense of your suffering, you often make sense of suffering through community.
Mhm.
When you find that others have suffered similarly or identically to you, it actually helps you feel like this is not an isolated experience and you
Yeah.
begin to understand it. And in the response that you make to suffering, you actually grow. And it prepares you for the reality of life. The fact of the matter is, all of us die. How do we make sense of that? And how do we
Mhm.
find meaning and purpose in the number of days that we do have of life?
Yeah, and you're so right. It's universal. All of the topics you address, all these challenges, crucibles as you call them, are universal. That's probably why I've read it so many times and I've shared it with many people.
Oh,
So
thank
thank you
you.
for
Well,
writing it.
I loved writing it. The book is laid out kind of, these are seven areas that I have really had
Mhm.
to learn from and to try and grow in.
Well, thank you for sharing yourself with us.
You bet. You bet.
So let's switch gears a little. So,
Okay.
maybe we can talk a little bit about challenges
Yeah.
in higher education in general, let's just say the country, but then bring it down to Westmont College
Yeah.
as well, because heaven knows there's a lot of that going on. And I know you have some very successful and creative strategies for handling some of that.
Well, it's a really unique period in higher ed, and there's just been a lot of strife, a lot of high profile
Hmm.
conflict. You certainly saw some of the Ivy League schools,
Hmm.
especially, particularly Columbia University, and then the response of the current administration to some of that. And so it's you recognize the challenge of how do you educate for essentially how do you live in a free society
Hmm.
with self-discipline so that you contribute to the positivity of society rather than its destruction. And you have to learn how to live together with difference. And so we talk a lot about part of our student life program is actually how do you live in community with people you disagree with, and which is something that we're growing very it's becoming more and more difficult in America. Years ago, one of my favorite writers, a sociologist at UC Berkeley named Robert Bellah, wrote a book called Habits of the Heart. And it was
Hmm.
basically him looking back, along with five of his former graduate students, at Alexis de Tocqueville's work, Democracy in America. And this is 150 years after its publication. And he was saying, where did he get it right? Where did he get it wrong? And one of the points that Bella makes is de Tocqueville believed that the two dominating philosophies were equality and individualism. And he said, but because of the kind of compensating virtues of so many voluntary associations in America, that equality would win out. Well, Bella says, unfortunately, individualism has won out, with the result that people are now dividing into what he called lifestyle enclaves,
Mm.
where you only hang out with people who think like you, look like you,
Yeah.
etc. And this was 1985 when he
Mm.
wrote the book. And so you're looking back 40 years and recognizing his observations have only intensified, they haven't
Mhm.
lessened. And part of what Bella calls us to is how do we learn to engage in disciplines that will actually bring us together and bring us into community. David Brooks, who we have every year at our Lead Where You Stand conference, he is making great contributions along with several others at talking about what does it mean to create the capacity for what he calls the eulogy virtues,
Mm.
not the resume virtues.
Mhm.
And the eulogy virtues are really those things that allow us to live together in community and learn how to understand and respect one another, even when we don't agree.
That is such an important lesson for students to
Yeah.
learn, and what a great opportunity for them. I don't know that I've heard of any other college or university teaching such a thing, and yet it's so powerful and so important.
One of the well, I appreciate that observation because what we strive to do, we don't always get it right. But what our attempt is, if you, as a student, want to publicly disagree,
Mhm.
what we would
Mhm.
might call activism
Sure.
or some sort of demonstration, you have to first go to the person you disagree with, you have to go to their presentation, you have
Ah.
to be there respectfully, and then after you've done that, then you can go and we have designated areas where you can practice your activism. You can express your point of view in opposition, but you can't go to the other person's public presentation and disrupt it.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
And so what I appreciate is it's truly trying to say you can have disagreeable points of view, but you can't be disagreeable. You
Mhm.
have to learn to live together with difference. And I think that that is just an important virtue that is in decline, but it's something that I hope we can bring back.
Yeah. Teaching the students to respect each other
Yeah,
and each other's differences and
absolutely.
kind of open their mind to a way of looking at things differently.
Well, one of the people that we've had, Daniel Kahneman, a famous behavioral
Mhm.
psychologist, and won the Nobel Prize for the basically the defining reality of behavioral economics. He has this acronym that stands for "What you see is all there is," and I actually use that in chapter 1 of The Crucible of Mismeaning, and he said the so many of us have the tendency to show up in a situation and believe that we can just fundamentally understand the situation by intuition.
Mm.
He said the reality is we almost never can understand by intuition. He said the instead of just saying, "Yeah, I totally understand what's going on here," our first instinct should be to say, "What can I not see? What am I unable to understand that
Mhm.
might be going on here?" And he said, if you can just make that kind of initial pause,
Mhm.
it will allow you to awaken to what are realities at play that I wouldn't have noticed and begin to learn to look and to see rather than to just assume that you understand. That's what we want to teach our students. How do you actually have enough humility
Mhm.
to say, I don't understand everything. I don't understand everything that's going on here. What is going on here that I may not have the capacity to understand? And it gives you this inclination to give other people the benefit of the doubt,
Mhm.
which is also something that we think is a virtue that
Yeah.
is in decline, but is so necessary for really
Yeah.
human flourishing.
Important life lesson.
Yeah.
I'd say those students that get to go to Westmont are pretty fortunate, as are their families.
Well, thank you.
So, Gail, so I know you work with your team.
Yeah.
How do you keep your team focused on a common vision?
Well, we work hard at it, and I love every member of our team. We have a great team. The Some of them have been with me the entire time that I've been a president. Our chief financial officer, Doug Jones, all 25 years I've been a president. He's been the
Wow, that's saying something.
7 years at Spring Arbor, 18 years at Westmont, and Reed Sheared 22 years, and then Irene has been with me since 2017. Kim is just in her third year, but settling in and just a great part of the team. And then we're in the process of hiring a new VP of student life.
Hmm.
But the team has really we do the team works well together for a variety of reasons. One of the disciplines we have is we have what we call the E-Team Covenant.
Mm.
And the E-Team Covenant is basically our public agreement of how we'll be as a team.
Mm.
And it includes things like if you're not at a meeting, we won't talk about your area. And so every part of the E-team covenant is meant to be, how do you instill trust? How do you build trust? How do you build reliability? And we don't talk about unlimited transparency, we talk about appropriate
Mhm.
transparency, that there are things that you just can't disclose because
Mhm.
you have legal responsibilities that prevent it.
Sure.
But where you can be open and transparent, then you have the responsibility to be that way. So we start every year with a 2-day planning retreat. We consolidate and integrate our goals, go to work. Halfway through the year, we have what we call our mid-year recalibration retreat. Where are we on track? Where are we not? And then we have our end of year assessment of how we did as we get ready to launch the
Mhm.
next year. Meanwhile, we meet every week as an executive team. I meet regularly with each member of the team one on one, usually in 3 or 4 week
Oh, okay.
increments. And there's enough conversation so that we stay in touch with each other. Of course, they obviously have my cell number and
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
instant access to me. And I really was deeply influenced by Steve Sample, who was the president for many years at USC. He was a key mentor. And then Red Poling was the former chair and CEO of Ford Motor. He was on my board at my institution in Michigan. And those two were especially effective at both selecting outstanding talent for their executive teams,
Mhm.
but also empowering them so that each member of the team felt ownership of their area of the
Mm.
organization. And I think that that's a key.
Yeah.
That I really try to be conversational, not punitive or
Mhm.
retaliatory in any way, but be conversational in terms of what's going well, where do we need to make adjustments, and where can I be of help? And then to let the VPs literally work in a way that gives them a lot of responsibility for each area of
Mm.
success. And so they feel a great deal of pride in the work that we've done together. Obviously, there are always areas where you have to work things out, and it requires that you have members on the team that are committed to
Mhm.
community and committed to conflict resolution and aren't just by their nature or temperament disruptive.
Mhm. That is so great. A lot of people could take a lesson from that. So let's talk about students.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I'm sure you hear this all the time, but I hear it a lot. Students will be confused. I don't know what I like. I don't know what I want to be. I don't know what I should major in, what I should study. When And to that student, it probably feels like I'm the only one. I'm embarrassed because everybody else seems to have a plan and I don't have one. So, what do you say to students who say, "What I don't know what I should do?"
Well, I love meeting with students, and right before I came down for this, I ended up having lunch with a student, an early lunch, and
Mhm.
he's a week away from graduating. He's a double major, and he's still not sure what he
Oh
wants to do.
gosh.
So he's going to take a year and think through it, probably go to grad school, but also experiment with some things. And you actually have two types of students that show up anymore. And one is the student who knows exactly what they want to do.
Mhm.
And the other type is they're not sure of anything and they really want to explore. And so you have those two main types that are now showing up, and the what we try to do is we actually try to get them to go through. We have several resources that will make assessments of you.
Mhm. Oh.
What are your personality traits? What are your vocational aspirations? What are your vocational capabilities? And these are meant to be suggestive, not conclusive. People are
Mhm.
sometimes put off by the idea that a test could somehow give this kind.
Yeah.
It's really meant to reflect back. Who are you, and how can you understand that? And in that you begin to get hints, and then we have a virtually every student is required to do some type of internship. And what we have discovered is that the internship is often a sorting out, and in many cases, it's what leads to a first job.
Mhm.
And so we want you to go through the assessments. We want you to sign up for your internship. We want you to have an experience of applying things that you learned during your coursework in one of the community organizations in which you serve. And we have found those combination of activities, both curricular and co curricular, to have really been effective at helping students begin to get a determination of what they should pursue. Now, 96%, and this is a stat that comes both from student life and from our vocational education program, 96% of all Westmont students graduate either going on to a job,
Mm.
a first job that they experienced as a result of their internship,
Mm.
or they get into one of the top three graduate programs that they
Mhm.
applied to. And so we feel very good about the success rate of our graduates in terms of going on either to a first job or to a graduate program of their choosing.
Mm, and so then when they're in an internship, they can also ask themselves, "Do I like this or not?"
Exactly. Well, and the internships have feedback loops in them. And so they're under the mentorship of a faculty member. They're also under the mentorship of the person in the organization to whom they're assigned. All three of my children are graduates of Westmont. All three of them had internships. All three of them, their first job was a result of their internship. So it's
Yeah.
and it included, my daughter who did nonprofit. My oldest daughter did nonprofit.
Mhm.
Second daughter did Habitat for Humanity. She now works for Habitat for Humanity, King County up in Seattle. Our son, his summer internship was at PricewaterhouseCooper. He became a accountant with PricewaterhouseCooper for 3 years. He's now a senior accountant
Mhm.
for Selkirk, and so I can personally relate to walking this path, not just with students, but with my own children
Yeah.
who became students, and I'm just very thankful for both the work of the vocational center, vocational aptitude center, as well as just the faculty in preparing
Mhm.
my children as Westmont students for a life of meaning and
Yeah.
impact.
I have to say over the years, I have had the pleasure of having several Westmont interns, like
Oh,
when I was at Girl
fantastic.
Scouts and other
Oh,
places, and
fantastic.
everyone, I was so impressed with them.
Oh gosh, thank you, Cinder. No,
Yeah.
well, we do think that on the whole, the quality of students that come to Westmont and the quality of the education they
Mhm.
receive at Westmont just really prepares them for a great life of contribution and leadership.
Mhm. Okay, so let's talk about, your own education journey. Peter Drucker and
Yeah,
Princeton, and so but
yeah.
the impact of your own journey on your life. Let's talk about that.
Well, I was born and raised in Eugene, Oregon, and my dad was a public school superintendent. My mother was a first grade teacher. So I grew up with education. It was very much dominant part. The University of Oregon's located there, and it's kind of the epicenter of the community. We loved going to everything associated with the university. And so I started off, I actually was recruited to play football at the University of Oregon and then
Golly.
had a fourth concussion, which in a Shrine State game. And so was not allowed to play football anymore. And I kind of had to redirect my life just a few weeks before I thought my life was going to be one way. Again, you look back on this and you think, okay, there are just so many things that I used to never admit that I'd had concussion, because people look at you and wonder, is there cognitive decline and how is it showing up? And certainly long before the concussion syndrome had been identified, my medical doctor just said, that you've had too much head trauma. And so, and I'm honestly, I look back and I just say, you know, thankful that he in 1977 was willing to say no more.
Yeah.
And so I competed in small college athletics, which I have just always loved. But it gave me a reorientation to I'd always loved school. I'd loved just competing in the classroom as much as on the field. But this time it was now essential that I
Mhm.
actually give my life to the life of the mind. Well, fast forward in my senior year, I have this intellectual awakening, and that's really what began to just propel me. I then became interested in going on to grad school. Who had influenced me the most? Don Green had. Where had he gone? Princeton Seminary. And so I chose places based on the people who had impacted me, who had impressed me.
Mm.
I had the most phenomenal education, and I go on to Princeton. It was 3 years. It's the longest master's degree. You have to learn 2 languages.
Oh
You do
gosh.
all of this all of this work, but it literally taught me how to think, and I just feel forever indebted. Well, I get into life and begin to realize where there are holes in my preparation, including in the business side of every
Mm.
organization. And I discovered this program at Claremont Graduate University where you can do a PhD in a humanities discipline and an MBA in strategic management, and of all things, work with Peter Drucker.
Wow.
And so in 1990, we moved. We didn't have children yet, but Pam and I moved to well, we lived in Orange County. She actually taught in Orange County, and then I would commute up to Claremont. It was always counterflow, so it was really easy on the LA freeways. And I would take 2 PhD seminars and 2 MBA classes every semester for 3 years, including summer sessions. And the it was amazing. I mean, it's like I would have a Hegel seminar and financial accounting, in the same semester. So it's 2 completely different ways to think, but it again was just part of that preparation, and so I've ended up with a lot of earned degrees. I've spent a lot of time in class, but I it also coincided with a lot of things I was doing vocationally that had direct bearing. And I am forever grateful that I had the privilege of studying with Dr. Drucker. In addition to the 4 classes I had with him, it was a 60 semester unit degree, so it was very comprehensive. But here's what I learned. Dr. Drucker was probably the most available professor I
Mm.
ever studied with. And here he was world renowned, but if you were a student and you wanted to have lunch with him, he would make time for you.
Wow.
I just and so why do I make time for students? Because of Dr. Drucker. I know what it felt like to have questions, to really want to probe, and to have somebody in your life that you wanted to know how they had thought through this. In fact, part of the conversation today with this student was just sorting out what should be the next step
Mhm.
as life unfolds. And Drucker, even then, Drucker said, I can't teach you all that you're going to face during your career, but I want to teach you how to think through all that you're going to face in
Mhm.
your career. And that's what I hope is part of my life lesson is my giving back is teaching the next generations how to
Mhm.
think through the challenges they'll
Yeah.
face. And that's what I learned from all of my education.
And that's exactly what you're doing.
I hope so. I totally hope so. And I, in many cases, believe so.
Yeah. And so I know global leadership and education
Yeah,
are two of your favorite subjects.
that's very true.
So maybe you want to tell us about that, why they're so important to you.
Well, this in from 92 to 2000, I worked in LA at another institution, and I was so struck with that assignment was both undergrad and graduate, and the graduate program drew me into many of the expatriate communities that make up the greater LA community. And I had never lived in a place like Los Angeles where it literally had all of these immigrant communities,
Mhm.
and to understand them you had to understand both their life in LA, but also their country of origin. And so I it just absolutely opened me to, wow, what is going on around the world? And
Mhm.
these are such different immigrant communities. And the how are they getting assimilated into American life so that they can preserve a sense of their own identity, but also how do they come to terms with the American system, the mores, the cultural
Mhm.
uh, atmosphere of America? There are just so many places my mind goes of experiences and situations I ended up in as I was working with these different immigrant communities. That's what actually supercharged my interest in global leadership.
Mm.
And then I began to look at how do people come to understand their jobs and how do they work effectively in them. And I was drawn to people like Erin Meyer, who wrote the book The Culture Map, why did she write the culture map? Well, her first responsibility at INSEAD, the famous business school in
Mhm.
Paris, was outplacement of executives that were retooling. In other words, you would come in from one country, you would go through a seminar or a series of courses at INSEAD, and then you would get placed by your multinational in another
Mm.
country. About 50% of the time, it didn't work out. And she became curious about why do some succeed and some fail? Well, I
Mhm.
have that same curiosity. She began to discover that there are these 8 areas that are kind of dominant in every country in terms of you have to understand how communication patterns happen. They don't have everybody communicates, but the patterns aren't the same. So how do you understand that? How do you understand their attitudes towards time? Like you'll end up in one country, very loose affiliation with chronological time.
Mhm.
You'll end up in a place like the United States where we're very driven by chronological time. And I began to get interested in that. And then I became interested in how do we learn? How do we become self aware? How do we become, develop a capacity for self
Mhm.
regulation? And so that combined with all of this interest in the global arena. And then I get to Westmont, and one of the two faculty, Mary Doctor and Laura Montgomery, have put together a pioneering orientation, and it's called the Cycle of Global Learning.
Mm.
And in the cycle of global learning, it's a 3 semester process where the semester before you travel and study overseas, you get oriented to how do I enter a foreign culture. Then the semester that you travel and study overseas, you travel with faculty not to hover, but to interpret.
Mm.
And one of my favorite poets, one of my favorite lines from a poem of his, T.S. Eliot's The Four Quartets,
Mm.
says, they had the experience, but they missed the meaning. And I think,
That's great.
isn't that an
Yeah.
awesome
Oh,
line?
wow.
Well, I think that's true of us globally, that we
Mhm.
have the experience, but we miss the meaning unless we have experts there that can interpret. And so our faculty travel to interpret. But then the most difficult part of the learning is bringing it home.
Mm.
And so we heard multiple accounts during my first year of students who the most phenomenal part of their experience was traveling overseas with other Westmonters, only to come home and feel completely misunderstood. Well, Mary and Laura had taken that on and they developed what they called the reentry seminar. And I joke, it's like bringing a spaceship back into the Earth's atmosphere. You don't want it to burn up. And the wonderful thing about that is it truly looks at all 3 components as critical to your experience abroad. That you have to be prepared to enter a foreign culture, you have to experience the culture, but learn how to put it in a framework of meaning,
Mhm.
and then you have to integrate it back into the life you
Mhm.
have as you return. And that has just in so many ways, whether you ever work outside the country or not, one of the things I learned during my, study with Drucker is he was the first one talking about our generation, my generation would face a 50-year working life
Mhm.
with 14 to 19 different working assignments with 1 outside the United States. What are you doing to actually prepare for that? And so that was a mindset that was different than any mindset that we had had previously in our country or even in our industries.
Mhm.
And that also motivated my interest.
Wow. That's pretty powerful. Now, I'm interested if so if you would describe your personal practices for staying connected to your vision.
Yeah. Well, I have a pattern. I go to bed at a reasonably early time, and it gives me enough sleep that I get up every morning at 4, and I don't set an alarm clock, so it's but I go to bed at 9, so that's still a decent night of sleep. But the getting up at 4, I have a discipline of reading, I have a discipline of meditation and prayer, and I have a discipline of going through my calendar. And so the reading is critical because as many of my responsibilities are extroverted oriented,
Mhm.
there's an element of it that's depleting. Well, reading actually restores my energy. And so
Mm.
I benefit from being able to learn. And if I feel like I have enough time to learn something every day, then it's easier for me to be depleted at the end of the day. And then the working through or thinking through my calendar, I like to be able to anticipate what I know is going to happen because so often I don't
Mm.
know what's going to happen
Yeah.
and it helps me adjust. And so that's where I actually do the review of both what are my priorities and am I actually using my priorities to structure my calendar and my appointments. And so every morning I think about the previous day, what went
Mhm.
well, what do I need to recover from? Is there anybody with whom I need to do repair work? And then what's coming this day?
Mhm.
And including this morning, I was thinking about what it would be like to be with you today and
Mhm.
thinking through this time and how I could make use of it in a way that would just be meaningful both for you and for me.
Mhm.
And so it prepares you for what you can anticipate. Of course, unbeknownst to me, 2 interruptions earlier this morning,
Gosh.
and but that's when school's in session, I always joke the day never begins and ends the way you think it will, and then once you get into the summer, you're still working, but you have a lot more control and
Yeah.
predictability when school's out of session.
Well, I think we can all take a page out of your book for your daily practice. That is great.
Even if you're a person of faith or a person of no faith, but high moral standards,
Mhm.
it's really just a time to think reflectively, to
Mhm.
become self-aware. I think of Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence, that he is so helpful in helping us, every single one of us, become more self-aware so that we can have better self-regulation. And
Mhm.
I had never heard the term amygdala hijack until I was
Mhm.
reading his work in the late 90s. And I recognized that so often people ruin opportunities because they can't control their temper.
Mm.
But why can't they control their temper? Usually because they've experienced some level of offense and disrespect, and they
Mhm.
react out of that sense of feeling offended or disrespected.
Mhm.
And if they could only learn that they're vulnerable to that, that that's almost a universal, all of us can be offended, often for different reasons. But if we can actually manage ourselves in the moment,
Mhm.
it really makes a difference. Chapter 2, where I talk about the crucible of enduring challenge, I have 12 categories or 12,
Mhm.
a list
Yeah.
of 12. And one of them is I've never gotten in trouble for things I thought but didn't say. And I just find that so often to be the case. If you can avoid making career limiting mistakes by just controlling your tongue, it allows you to actually come back to situations in a
Mhm.
much more constructive way.
Very wise advice. So you have served on boards over the
Yeah,
years, and so
yeah.
I'm interested in that, and your rationale for doing that.
Well, the as an organization that benefits and relies on volunteers ourselves, we have a completely volunteer board at Westmont, and we ask a lot of them.
Mhm.
And so I think when you work in an environment like I do that relies on volunteers, you should be willing to be a volunteer. And so
Mhm.
when I've been asked and when my schedule would permit, I have tried to be responsive. I was on the Santa Barbara Symphony Board for
Mhm.
9 years. I'm currently on the board of Oaks Christian School down in Thousand Oaks,
Mhm.
Westlake Village. Our children actually went to Providence for
Mhm.
high school here in town, and although I've never served on their board, we've had a lot of activity and
Mhm.
interaction with them, and really appreciate the work and have volunteered a lot there. And so we try to also be both individual and as a married couple to give back in the community in a variety of ways, all of which are volunteer
Mhm.
ways. Mostly because, well, certainly it's a value that we carry, but also we just know that we benefit from that
Mhm.
same spirit in other people and want to
That
reciprocate.
is so true. Good for you. I mean, as busy as you are and you realize how important it is to make time for that.
It really is, and the Pascal is my favorite philosopher, and he has this line where he says, "Respect means putting yourself out," and what he means by that is extending yourself,
Yeah.
and I think that volunteering in other organizations is a way in which we show
Mhm.
respect for them.
Yeah. And for our community.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So tell us about, Westmont downtown. I think a lot of people are curious about that even though it's been there for a while now still.
Well, it's really taking off, and we're excited about this, and it's really taken off with the Westmont Groton House nursing program. So it's filling up all 4 floors. It's in the original Hutton Parker
Mhm.
Foundation, building. Tom Parker, who recently passed, was
Yeah.
just a great friend of the college. We are forever grateful for Tom, and wonderful man, sad to see him go,
Mhm.
and then we've more recently added the 29 West Anapamu building, which is the Keith Center,
Mm.
and that's actually undergoing renovation right now, and it will allow us to expand our nursing program as well as add other allied health. And then we wanna do some, unique focus on leadership development,
Mm.
so we'll be offering some, post-baccalaureate, work in, executive leadership, education, and also, global studies. And
Mhm.
so,
That's great.
well, we're going to leverage where we have unique, opportunities, and then we actually want to start, some sort of, content creation that will allow us to extend the reach and influence of the college more globally,
Mm.
and we haven't really decided what that will look like, but we wanna do local, national, and global, and so we're trying to really work through our strategies to do that in the best way that suits Westmont.
I have no doubt that you will accomplish that. So what do you want people to know about Westmont?
That is a wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. We are deeply committed to being great members of the community, and
Mhm.
it matters a great deal to us that the community understand the college, that they really benefit from the presence of the college. I am always heartened when people say, "We love hiring, we love hosting Westmont students.
Mhm.
We think you're an incredible asset in the community." That just matters greatly, to me and I know to the entire Westmont family. We are a close-knit group, and,
Mhm.
I love the way that we look after each other. We often talk about being people of faith, but also being committed to the intellectual tradition that, actually puts a high premium on, great study,
Mhm.
and that we believe in the value of discipline and being an active part of our community in ways that benefit the community.
That's great and so important. Can you tell us about a pivotal experience from your life, either personal, professional, or both?
Wow, there are just so many of them that have really been significant. One of the most pivotal experiences pertained to 2 conversations I had when I was thinking of coming to Westmont. The invitation to candidate had been sent to me, and I had loved my time here as a student. And the one was a conversation with Red Poling, who was the retired chair and CEO of Ford Motor, and the other, I mentioned him earlier, was Dr. Sample, who was then the president of USC, and in both cases, they surprised me, and in part, they surprised me because my relationship with them at that point in time was very clear and defined, and they didn't let that limit them. Red was, of course, based in Michigan, and, he really said, "Where will you have the greatest opportunity to learn and grow?
Mm.
Where will you have the opportunity to be the most like yourself?" He actually took me through a series of questions I just found really incredibly insightful and very helpful. And then Dr. Sample talked about his hesitancy initially to candidate for the position at USC. He was president of SUNY Buffalo in the
Mm.
State University System of New York. And then he told me he'd been there 11 years, had this experience one day where he realized, he had been thinking about it very differently. And in his interview process with USC, he really realized that he wanted to be there in a way he had never seen. And so he encouraged that at least go for the visit, at least go to see, because you will be able to tell in one visit whether or not the best expression of yourself is there or not. Well, we came and and it literally activated my imagination. And that's what I've come to see is I do have a disciplined approach to how I evaluate opportunity. But one of the ways in which I was a new discovery for me was to have my imagination activated by, okay, this is a place that not only where you could dream dreams, but you could actually fulfill them.
Mhm.
And the something that's just amazing to me in our community is there are people of great ideas and great resources, and that combination is usually necessary in order to improve life. And That is, that is what I hope is our contribution as a college.
Yeah. And so the discipline, which is your sort of natural way of approaching
Yeah,
life, is so important. And yet you tuned into your imagination, which was not
absolutely.
a normal
Well,
thing for you.
the now that's a great observation because that's really what was a new experience for me was it had happened previously, but I hadn't understood it that way.
Mm.
And so the having that happen and also kind of being coached into understanding, pay attention to what how activated your imagination is by either where you are or does and Dr. Sample said this, you may visit and your imagination may activate for your current situation.
Mm.
Pay attention to that. He said when I visited when I was at SUNY, came out to visit USC, I saw the SC opportunity in a completely new way. See if that happens to
Mm.
you. And so it was again in both cases, both Red and Dr. Sample, they gave me ways. They said it's not clear what you should do, but you'll be able to tell by exposing yourself and expose yourself to the opportunity at Westmont, and you'll be able to understand what you should do. And I found that to be so true.
And trust yourself.
Trust
Trust
yourself,
yourself
exactly.
that you will know.
Well, I what I discovered is that you think about something uh, occasionally, then you start thinking about it more, and then you kind of get overrun and you can't stop thinking about it. Or, gosh, if we went, we could do this and
Mhm.
that and that. And that's the activated imagination that once you experience it, it's actually hard
Yeah.
to do it any differently.
So that's another lesson that I'm learning from you to intentionally surround yourself with people who are wise.
Well, the I that is something that I've always valued, and I think was just I love being with my father. I loved just time with him, even in high school when a lot of high school kids separate from their parents.
Mhm.
I certainly feel differentiated from him, but I always crave being with my dad and love time and with him. And so it gave me a disposition to always try to learn in our faith tradition, men and women had equal leadership responsibilities. And so there have been a lot of mature female executives who have been willing to, in very appropriate ways, talk with me about their own careers and in some cases, painful experiences, hitting the
Mhm.
glass ceiling, et cetera. But the orientation that was really carved in me by my dad, of, pay attention to older people, they have more experience, they have more wisdom,
Mhm.
learn to respect that, not resent it. I think that I was raised with a disposition that inclined me to be willing to listen to others and figure out what fit me,
Mhm.
without being constrained by it, and I do feel fortunate to have had so many, wonderful people speak into my life.
Well, I think we in Santa Barbara are so fortunate to have you in our community leading Westmont College. What a blessing you are.
Well, Cindy, you're very kind and encouraging. Thank you for that. It's my privilege, and I love getting to do what I get to do every day. So it's a great blessing for me as well.
Well, and thank you for coming on TV Santa Barbara's Community Conversations to share all that with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Community Conversations. We'll see you next time.